thank you for coming during this lunch talk. I know it's not the best time, but we have 20 minutes, so that's short to talk about licenses. But the idea is to give you some key takeaways, so for you to better understand open source licensing, and what to use, not to use, and what to choose if you want to open source some projects. Are you familiar with open source in the room? Who's not familiar with open source? Everyone knows open source licenses? Yes? So, okay, that's fine. Do you know? So that's going to be maybe easier. So just a quick words about myself. So I'm Florent, Zara, work at the Eclipse Foundation. So at the Eclipse Foundation, my role is mainly to help our members do open source a better way, to help them, because we have more and more members coming and say, yes, we want to do open source, we need to do open source, but we don't know how to do it. Please help us in that case. So help them with building internal open source committees, with what we call OSPOs, so like a kind of center of competency for open source. I'm also giving training sessions and also talks like that, like I'm doing today, to do some evangelism about open source and how to do it, and how to better understand that open source does not mean it's not equal to open bar, basically. So that's my main role at the foundation, the Eclipse Foundation. Mainly the Eclipse Foundation because of the IDE historically, but know that the Eclipse Foundation, that's way much more than the IDE. Just like the Apache Foundation, that's not the Apache server, that's way much more. The Linux Foundation is not about only the Linux kernel. So we have 450 projects, more or less, coming to the cloud department, the AI, the IoT, the embedded world. We have a vertical in the automotive. So lots and lots of projects. If you are interested in the infrastructure and looking for middleware, just have a look at what the Eclipse Foundation can offer you. We host like a great deal of projects around here, not only in the IDE. We have the new generation of IDE, also the new Eclipse IDE, if you want, called Theia. So we have a lot of things. I'm also running, maybe some of you know the linuxfr website.org website in France. That's a French collaborative news website in French speaking. Sorry guys for the English guy in the room. So I'm also working them on my free time. So just as an introduction also, as you understood, I am not a lawyer. So what I'm going to tell you to do today, is not a legal advice, okay? But now let's pretend we're all lawyers in the room, and we will understand what's coming. So, and because of that, we need to have a few bases on just some legal stuff. That's maybe a couple of slides, won't be boring. And then sure that there will be some more funny part in the presentation. But what you need to know is that software is considered to be an intellectual work. And because of that, the intellectual property laws apply to software, just like to music, to any creation you can make. Music, movies, text, novels, poetry, everything just like that. I don't say that source code is a poetry, but that's the same laws that applies to a software. And when we're saying about software, computer program, we talk about the software, the documentation, the test, everything that's come with it. And that's why, I think the first time it started in 1974 with a US court saying that yes, you can consider software as intellectual property, and then you can make some value out of it, because before that was mainly hardware. And then started to be software also, where people were starting to sell software at the beginning. That was just a commodity when you were selling hardware. But in 1996, the WIPO is like for the French, the Organisation Mondiale de la Propriété Intellectuelle. So that's so they recognize the protection of computer programs and databases with a copyright mechanism. So this is an oversimplified intellectual property schema. Just for you to understand also the basis, and that's the two, let's say, legal-oriented slides on my talk. So in the intellectual property, there is what we call the author's right, droit d'auteur en français, for the French guys in the room, and we have the copyrights for mainly the people in the US. And those two, in the author rights, you have mainly two rights: the moral rights, le droit moral, and the economic patrimonial rights, the droit patrimoniaux. So when you work for a company, so the moral rights, you cannot give them up. You cannot sell them, you cannot give them, you cannot say, I think that's something that belongs to you. When you do something, we cannot refuse you the right to say, this has been done by me. But when you work for someone and when you sell something that's under the copyright law, you give your patrimonial rights, your economic rights. So then when you work for your employer, for example, everything you do for your boss belongs to your boss, belongs to your company, not to you. But you give up, let's say you sell your economical rights, not the moral rights. So when you do something, you can still claim that, yes, I want my name in the about box, for example, when you do a software. But that's not only that, the intellectual property. There is more than that. There is the trademarks, le droit des marques, the trade secrets, le droit des affaires, les patents, les brevets. That's many things. We won't talk about that. We will maybe focus on the patrimonial rights because the licenses, they rely on copyright mainly. So just some basics to know about licenses. But now let's a bit dive in about open source. What is it exactly? Because I've just given yesterday, no later than yesterday, in this very school, a training to students in the last year, and they mainly said, okay, open source equals freedom. Let's say not freedom, free. It's free, as in free beer. Okay, c'est gratuit. And open source, okay, I can have the source code, I can download it for free, and that's great, I can use it in my project. Yes, go on. But that's a bit more than that. It's more than, it's a specific development methodology. It's like for some people a philosophy. But at its core of open source, there is a legal framework because it's based on copyright. So there is some key characteristic. First, the source code must be available to everyone. That's the foundation of everything else. If we don't have access to the source code, it's not open source. Then, building the four freedoms, you need to have the four freedoms from the Free Software Foundation made by Richard Stallman. So this is the short version of the talk. So usually I have a bit of a history behind to explain where does the four freedoms come from. But you need to be granted these four freedoms. The freedom to use it and for any purpose, even those you don't like. If you don't give on an open source, you can say that I don't want my license to be used by the military or to be used in the nuclear sector or to be used by Americans because I don't like Americans, or to people with beer or with bald people. You can't make a restriction on that. The right to study. So the right to study basically is to understand how it works. So you need to have access to the source code. So you can use it, study it. You are able to modify it, do some modification inside the source code, recompile it for your needs. And the fourth freedom is to distribute the program for any purpose. Distribute means for you, the original version or the modified version. So you need to be granted those four freedoms. And that's really the key part of free software, open source software. But these four freedoms, they are not just something informal promises. Something, okay, I promise you can do that. No. There is a legal mechanism behind that. These freedoms, they are given to you, granted to you through an open source license, which can be considered as a contract. So it's kind of a contract saying, okay, we give you those freedom, and that's irrevocable. So you cannot withdraw them after. So when you combine everything, you create now a powerful model, a powerful mechanism for collaboration, transparency, and massive parallel collaboration. When you look at the Linux kernel, for example, or the Firefox browser, or you name any big open source project, Kubernetes, they are let's say the only project that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on all time zones. There is always people contributing, releasing, testing, and it's working 24/7 without any break. So this definition that we've seen before, from the open source definition we've seen before, there is an official definition maintained by what we call the Open Source Initiative, the OSI. This is a vendor neutral foundation incorporated in the US, and they act as a neutral steward of this definition, which has been recognized in 1998. There is 10 criteria for license to be open source, but basically I won't go through the 10 criteria. That's not really useful for you. What you need to understand that those 10 criteria, they make sure that you have the 4 freedoms when you use a software under license that has been recognized by the open source initiative. So it respects the open source definition. If you have any question, I will try to keep some times at the end of please keep them in your mind and I will answer them at the end of the talk. So, and one last notion you need to understand is the copyleft. The copyleft, that's a key feature also. There is different kinds of licenses, as we will see. So the copyleft is pushing the copyright law to its boundaries. Because copyright, basically the copyright laws, what they have to, their purpose is to restrict you from using it. So you can only use a software, usually proprietary software, with a copyright, like just the way the software vendor wants you to use it. You can use it only on your machine for one person with maybe for this specific usage. So there is a lot of restriction. The copyleft is pushing the copyright law to its boundaries to make sure that it grants you the maximum freedom. That's the idea. So when the traditional copyright, so you have limitation, that's the opposite. We grant you freedoms and we make sure that the modification, they are still free. You cannot close the software anymore. So you need to pass with the copyleft. You have those freedoms, the 4 freedoms we talked before, and you need to pass them to the people you redistribute your modification. That's the idea of copyleft. So sometimes you see that's a contagion, that's virality, that's sometimes related to a virus. I prefer to talk about a share alike clause, So this is really the heart of copyleft. And on the other side, you have the licenses, the open source licenses we call permissive licenses. That's, okay, you have access to the source code, then do whatever you want with it. Basically, we'll see there is some kind of obligation sometimes behind. You need to say that you're using those projects with those open source license, but basically we don't want you to, you don't need to redistribute the modifications. Before that, the chamber of horrors, some kind of bestiary, some things you can think, no, that's open source, but maybe not. That's obviously non-OSI approved license. So this is the license, just the nerds and the developers, sometimes they love it, the beware license. So the guys say, okay, as long as you must retain this notice, and if you find this software useful, you can do whatever you want with it, but if you find it useful and we cross each other, sometimes just pay me a beer. So that's it. That's the beware license. It is used in the Fedora project, for example. So all the coming licenses, they are real examples, There is the hot potato license, la patate chaude. So this one is basically, okay, the last person making a commit on this repository owns the whole copyright of the project. So, and then now you do whatever you want. And and this is granted for every people living in the Milky Way galaxy, inhabitants, so La Voie lactée. So that's basically you can, so that's, but that's not open source because that's against some copyright laws shared across the globe. So the WTFPL, you have to explain the what the fuck public license, basically saying just do what the fuck you want with it. It has been drafted by Sam Osvar, which is kind of a hacker from Central Paris, a big engineering school. And the license was refused as OSI approved. It said, okay, this license, yes, it's compatible with open source definition, but we won't approve it because we already have a license, basically with the same terms, but not more polite, let's say, okay, the same terms, but more polite. So, okay, we don't want to multiply the license because you will see there are a lot of them. The YOLO license, basically, it says, okay, everything is in all caps, because it looks super serious, okay? And then YOLO swag blast it. So, because, but again, not open source, and that's real project behind that sometimes. So, there were the most funny one. You may have come across this one, the JSON license. So license saying basically, this is a nice license unless for one line. The software should be used for good and not evil. So this is a restriction on the usage, but depends on which part of the world you live, depends on the geopolitics, what is good, what evil. It's not really good. It's hard to define. So this is what we call an ethical license. You may find some license like that. There is also some licenses called the root, so an anti-racist ethical license. There is a license dedicated to worker rights. There is the do not harm license. Also, you have non-violence license like that. But because there is a restriction on the field of use, it's not open source. But there is some kind of movement about that. But they were claiming being open source, but the guy from the open source and a lot of people in the open source community said, no, this is not open source, sadly. It's complicated. So this is a list of open source license. So you have a choice. Please don't go to the chamber of horrors we've seen before. Don't choose that one. There is, as the last year, 1 year ago, nearly 120 licenses, approved licenses. Sometimes they are old ones, not used anymore. We know superseded by new versions, solved that problem they encountered. So basically, but they are trying to streamline the number of licenses, open source licenses, because it's really a mess. No, let's say that's really, there is a shitload of them. So as you've seen, if there is an equivalent of the license you're trying to get approved, so it won't get approved. Say, okay, use this one instead. That's better because it's recognized by the community. Sometimes it has been tested in a court, so it's better. So this is the permissiveness of the license. You remember at the beginning, I think there was the copyleft license. So we've seen the non-open source license. Sometimes that's free to use, like the JSON license. The Java research license, that's limited for academics, not for production. And then you have this open source license, and then the public domain. That's maybe not applicable to you, Brian, but in France, you cannot put something in the public domain because you cannot give up your mobile rights. So because you cannot give up in France your mobile rights, you cannot put something in the public domain. You have to be dead for that and wait for 70 years. So that in that case, your work will be in the public domain. But until that, you cannot do it. And then in the middle, you have those open source licenses with different categories. The copyleft licenses on the left and the permissive licenses on the right. So the more permissive on the right, and then you can do nearly whatever you want with Apache. For example, so if we go with Apache, BSD, and MIT, you can take the source code, you can modify it, you can add it to your software, your project. The only thing usually you have to do, depending on there is some kind of obligation behind, is that you need to say, okay, you need to say that, okay, my software contains project, lines of code, source code from this project under this license. You need to name it. You need to give paternity. That's the same for Apache. That's the same also, but it's more structure, this license. And there is also a clause for patents. Because sometimes people put some kind of time bomb inside software. Okay, they give a contribution in open source to your software, and the license say, okay, yes, this is software I wrote, nice lines of. Then maybe your software is successful, used by many people around the globe, and then he said, oh, by the way, I have a patent on those lines, so now you need to give me money. So you put a patented software inside a license. On that, saying that when you have when you put code in open source under an Apache 2 license, you also give up the right to reclaim patent fees on it. With copyleft license, so what you do on a strong and weak copyleft license, depending on the reach. But then when you do a modification under this license, you need to publish back your modifications. Sometimes only to the library, only to the module you're working on, and sometimes, if it's a strong copyleft license, to the whole project. But please, if you have any question on that, please come back to me after. So again, the software licenses, they are a legal instrument to make your people to respect the rights and what you want them to do with the software. some licenses, open source licenses, on the opposite of the proprietary licenses, you can combine them. There is some compatibility. You know, the more permissive one can be included in the copyleft licenses. So the permissive can be included in the, for example, the BSD-like in some LGPL, which is kind of a copyleft license limited to the library. And then those weak copyleft can be included in strong copyleft licenses. Again, I don't have time to come into details, but know that there is some compatibility metrics on the web. You have a website from the European Commission also. Look for licenses compatibility, and you will find some metrics explaining you how you can combine licenses. But be careful with what you combine for, because if you want to put your project under an Apache 2 license, you may not be able to use GPL v2 libraries with it. If you want it to be still Apache v2 and not become GPL v2 license. So my advice, now we'll come to the advice, is that adopt, if you want to release a project under an open source license, please adopt a popular license with a strong community. They're often attached to a community. Those, you know, we talk about the Apache license, the BSD, MIT license, the Eclipse, Mozilla licenses, or the GNU ones. If you want to maximize the freedom of the user, if you want to maximize the freedom of the developer, the company, to make business-friendly licenses, maybe go to more permissive licensing like the Apache, Eclipse, or BSD, MIT. There are some corner cases, but dual licenses, company making their software available under an open source license and sometimes also under a proprietary license. Because some company buying software say, okay, that's free, that's open source. No, I don't want that, I don't know that. That's maybe a risk for me. And they say, okay, no problem, ignore that. And this is the software with the proprietary license, for example. Some software vendors also, because they control the software, they can change the license, the open source license. If there is not community, if the software is under the control of one company, an open source software, they can change the license. Think about Elasticsearch or MongoDB, for example. They change the license because at the beginning they say, okay, let's go open source, let's build a huge community. And then they raise some money and they have to give some money back and then say, okay, we have to put more value on it. So let's close it and make the community pay. And so for that, the easiest way for them is to change the license, but at the expense of the community. Licenses are more for just software. You have licenses for media, what we call text, images, music. Maybe you've heard of the Creative Commons sometimes. Wikipedia is under a Creative Commons license, for example. For database content and for open data in general, you have licenses in the same way. So you have the Creative Commons and the Open Data Commons. So you have licenses for the public domain. I won't go into details. For licenses for attribution, so that's basically permissive licenses, just like the Apache. You just need to give the name of the author, but you don't need to publish your modification if you don't want to. So you've got those two licenses. And then for copyleft style licenses, share alike, you have also some Creative Commons dedicated to that. And another piece of information, the Stack Overflow. How many of you have already, look at Stack Overflow, copy paste to my code, and that's okay. That's don't be ashamed. We won't see your face on the camera again. But that used to be sometimes, the term of services of Stack Overflow said at the beginning, you could have that could have been okay if you have a dump, take it from the dump. That would be CC by share alike, so that could have been okay. But which is not anymore for a couple of years now. So if you do copy paste, there's still copyright and you cannot use it. You will be in violation of copyright laws. So artificial intelligence, that's also a full topic. There is a new definition, 1 year old. That's not because having the code open is not enough, because you have some people say, okay, yes, we are open source model. Usually that's only the weight they have, the open weight. But if you want to recreate or to do some modification, you need the data, you need the source code to train with the data, to train the model with the data to get the trained model. And if you want to have the full freedom to use, to study, to modify, to share within the beginning, you need just more than the source code or just the weight of the model. You need but I won't go into details. That's still new, still a work in progress. There is a first version, but there will still be some modification, some discussion about that. But know that there are specific licenses and specific definitions for open source AI. And extra word, and we are nearly finished because I think there is no more talk coming. You need to keep some things in mind as a developer. You know, more and more open source is allowed, even encouraged to do in your company. I know lots and lots of companies encouraging you to contribute to open source project. But feel free to be creative, as I said, but remember that the line between your personal work and your work project, your professional, you know, sometimes not really clear. You need to make it clear with your boss, with your company. And keep quiet about anything you pay to work on. And with that, I said also, do not put sensitive stuff into like secrets, API password, internal URLs into your contribution, you know. And you need to check with your manager that what you do on your personal time do not compete with what you do on your professional time. So, on your personal time, you do the work on your own initiative. That's not asked by your manager. You use your own tool and your own resources. Do not use the laptop provided or the computer provided by your company to do personal stuff and personal commits to GitHub, for example. Make sure it is not connected to your job, or if it is, ask for permission to do it and return permission. And again, don't share personal or sensitive information. And if you don't stick to those rules, things can get messy. So best case, best scenario belongs to your employer. So you lost the moral, not the moral rights, the patrimonial rights, and you lost the copyright. The worst case, it's copyright infringement. So that could put you in trouble. So that's the last slide. Open source is not free code. You can do whatever you will like with. There is licenses and you have rights given the 4 liberties we've seen, but you have also duties. That's sometimes to name the person behind the software you're modifying or to give back your modification. Open source licensing can be complex. Ask for help. Be careful how you mix licenses when you're going to redistribute. You know, we've seen that there are some incompatibilities. And I've just said that. Choose your license carefully when you open source a software. I will share the slide. You will find some resources. There is an extended version of this talk I've done in Volcamp 2 months ago. If you want to have you look for Volcamp license to code. And if you have time to give your feedback now or a bit later, your honest feedback to help me improve. Again, this is a short one. There is some kind of key element I wanted to give you, but if you have any questions, I don't know. No, we don't have time for questions.